Hey guys, this is Ben the Creator, and today I'm super honored to be part of this project with my good friend Dulce Encinas with Kindness Therapy. And she had this idea to start a podcast to talk about mental health. I know I invited you to one of my podcasts, and we got a lot of positive feedback, and this kind of inspired everything. And do you want to tell people how long you've been doing this and what are your credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a licensed social worker here in Arizona. I've been in the field for about 12 years. I just started my business about 3 months ago. When we did the interview a few months back, I had just opened doors. So yeah, we talked about it. I think it would be a great resource for people to know what is mental well-being, what is mental health, and address answers questions to anything that has to do with that. I think on top of it, there's a layer where I'm Latina, Mexican, and I can bring in that extra layer of understanding our background and how that affects your mental health or your mental well-being.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think one of the reels that we shared together got a lot of positive feedback and just a lot of engagement. And I think it was just that because you did talk about that, like that there's a lot of stigmas about being Latino and mental health. I personally dealt with depression, anxiety. Oh, I'm getting emotional, but and I totally understand. Our approach is different. I personally had dealt with a loss. My little cousin committed suicide. She was 14 years old, and when we went through it, I remember I was going through depression. And I've been open about it, so this is not going to be new for people that are going to see this. And I remember at the time I was battling my own demons, and I had thoughts of suicide. And around the time that it happened, she did it. And I asked my cousin, her uncle, what was she doing before? And his response was she didn't want to go out to family gatherings. She didn't want to hang out. She would be sleeping all day. And his response was like, we thought she was being a huevona, which huevona means lazy.
Lazy.
That she just didn't want to do anything. And it was a huge eye opener. Like, they had to go through the immediate family, like my cousins, her mom, and the people that lived in their home. They had to go through therapy, and it was just something that we just didn't know how to deal with it. And we definitely have a different perspective about it. Even now, like a couple of weeks ago, actually 6-7 weeks ago, I dealt with depression a little bit, and I was like shutting down a little bit, and I did everything in my power to still showing up, like still did what I did. And I even had an open conversation with my parents, because the first time that, and I don't like the first time I brought it up to them years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I actually was in that dark place, when I brought it up to them, they didn't know how to deal with it. They weren't trying to be mean or anything, but it was just in a nutshell, they just said, just move forward, just kind of
keep a positive mind.
And this time around, when I decided to open up about it, because they saw that I was a little bit down and out, I was going through some other financial issues, and my mom and my dad, the same day I would go visit them, and they would tell me, they both told me the same thing the same day, and in different time, because they're not together. They said, oh, what's going on with you? You seem a little down. I'm like, I'm dealing with this stuff with the condo I'm selling. I think it's just leftover stress. Once I get the money, I'm going to be happy. And it just planted the seed. Then throughout the days after I closed my deal and I had money in my bank and paid things off, I really thought, once I have the money, then I'm going to be happy. Then I'm going to be okay. But I realized I wasn't. And I decided to do some counseling, like online, doing the whole thing. And I just was like, I decided to take action. I never did before. Last time I went through battled depression, all that, like I really didn't talk to anybody. Yeah. And this time around, when I told them what I was doing, they were super supportive. They opened, my dad said, what do you feel you're missing? Think maybe, what is it? And then I started thinking, like, I didn't really think I felt I was missing something, but it made me think. I was like, okay, I felt that the company wasn't moving, growing as fast as I thought it was supposed to. I got super excited. I was doubting myself. Okay, this is my second time starting a media company. I don't know if I told you that before, but this is my second time. I felt like maybe I'm going to fail again. And almost like PTSD, that because I'm going to fail again, I'm going to go through depression again. And So I have a friend of mine that he's a life strategist, business strategist, aka life coach, and
Mhm.
he told me the quote from Tony Robbins that he says, "I feel it's people that go through depression, so they feel like they're not moving, that there's no progress, and they focus on the lack of stuff." And I started thinking like, okay, I am moving. It's little, I don't know, little steps, but I'm moving. But the crazy thing about the whole situation is my dad is the one that
This
made me
one.
think about that. And my mom, the same thing. She says, maybe try to stay busy. What are you not doing before? Like my fiance said, you don't go hang out with your friends as much. Because I was so focused on building out the media company that I was obsessed.
Mhm.
Wasn't going, I stopped drinking, I wasn't hanging out, like, but I took it to an extreme where I was just secluded myself. And I love socializing with people and connecting with people. And this is the reason why I like doing this, like the podcast, because I'm connecting with people and hearing people's other stories. And my mom says, "Oh, maybe get back to the things that you love." So I went out of my way. I talked to a friend of mine that I haven't talked to in like months, and I told him, like, "Hey, man, dude, like my bad, I shut down." And I told him what's happening. He opened up to me that he was going through some stuff, and but I reconnected. Once I started reconnecting and I started being active, like working out consistently, because for me, when I was going through all this, wasn't as consistent at the gym. I wasn't working out because the anxiety. Also, I was dealing with anxiety, and but I started getting back in those little habits. It wasn't as Monday through Friday kind of deal, but like I went a couple days and I started focusing on gratitude and put me in a state of mind where I felt like I have this horrible habit of anytime I do something, I want it to be like my way, like I envision, and I'm so stuck on that.
Mm.
And I listened to a sermon, and the preacher talked about it was through the pandemic, his story that he developed tennis elbow, and he said the reason why he developed it, he says, I never played tennis, like I just lift weights, and he's it's not about like playing tennis, is how hard you grip something. And what he said was like the metaphor, it was like, all right, like when God has something planned for you, you keep your hand open,
Yeah.
and and just be flexible and be open minded. And that's the same thing that Steven told me. He's don't ever, you have to be flexible with your approach. Don't let go of your goal. Because ultimately, this is my vision. This is where I want to grow this into. This is like what mainly pays my bills. Like right now, I do real estate. And I was so hard on myself. I don't know where that comes from. And obviously, maybe we could dive into. I have a couple questions of what other people. Obviously, we both share that we're both Mexicans. My family's from San Luis Rio Colorado, Mexicali, Baja California, and I personally could relate to this. And I have a couple questions. I know I went off like that was unexpected.
That's okay.
And right now, like before we were filming, you told me not to apologize. I was about to apologize right now.
Good.
And what was the thing you said? Why I shouldn't do that?
Because I do have a couple points with everything that you said. First off, thank you for having the trust and telling me.
Yeah.
And I love that we started off this way because it really opens the door for the people that are listening to feel comfortable seeing us, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely want our podcast, and I'm going to say our because we're doing it together, our podcast to open the door for vulnerability.
Yeah.
So buckle up, Buttercup, because this feeling thing that you're feeling is going to continue to happen.
And I'm like, and the thing is, I'm such an emotional person.
Good.
And
we all should be.
And I'm getting goosebumps. I just feel growing up, I don't know where this comes from. My mom she had a rough life. She went through some personal things that she had to do as a kid, and she had a hard time like showing affection.
Yeah.
Obviously. And so I don't know where it came from. My dad was like, he was a great man, but he wasn't really affectionate. He was a loving man, but he showed love in a different way. I don't know why I was like, I'm like an anomaly. Like I'm such an emotional. None of my cousins are like this, but I'm so empathetic. That's what it's. I feel like sometimes like it could be my biggest weakness, but also my biggest strengths.
Oh, absolutely. It is definitely a strength. And I think that being an anomaly is not a bad thing at all. I actually beg to differ. I think that out of everybody, you're the one who didn't succumb to that expectation. Yeah. It's just like you did your own thing, which is a very entrepreneurial thing too.
Yeah.
We go off on our own little way. But I think it's a strength. I think being emotionally available is a strength. I think being empathetic is a strength. I think that the more people that are able to practice those things, the better our world would be. With what you said, though, I do want to like hone on a couple things. One of the things that, again, bringing you awareness, you just asked me, why don't you want me to say sorry? And I will bring little points like that throughout the podcast. It's just little tiny things that I practiced. They're very small, but they're so powerful. When we keep saying, I'm sorry, we're subconsciously telling our brains, we're sorry people. And so you can say, I apologize, or you can say, oh, my bad, or I need to do this different. But every time that we say things like, I'm sorry, or I'm ugly, or I'm stupid, or whatever, we subconsciously are telling ourselves that we're sorry people. And so then, and the piece about being sorry is that it's supposed to make you small. I'm sorry, my bad. Then you become the smaller person to then open the door for the other. No, we have to hold space.
Yeah.
We're late. It is what it is. Thank you for being patient. It's like, I'm sorry I'm late.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you so much for being patient, because now you're looking at the world with gratitude.
Yeah.
This person is a patient, loving person, and they gave me the space to be here late. So you start practicing little verbiage things. And with that, I think, and this is just to bring awareness, because that's the point of the podcast, right? You said, my cousin committed suicide. I will invite you and everybody who has had a loss like that to say died by suicide. Because I think when we use the verbiage commit or completed, it's as if it was like a thing that they needed to get done. Yeah. But if we say we died by suicide, it's the same as dying by cancer. And I want to be cautious when I say the same, right? Because I think I can hear people being like, what do you mean the same? It's not the same. One is an illness. The brain is an organ, just like the rest of our body. And so if you're having severe depression, any kind of depression, there's something going on with your brain. The same way that somebody who has diabetes is going on with her pancreas, right? There are organs in our body that need to be taken care of. And so when people die by suicide, they're dying by an illness, right? And so it's a switch around. You start looking at it as people who die by suicide as a victim, rather than looking at them as not being strong enough or being selfish or whatever stigma that surrounds suicide. Yeah. And like you said, era huevona. Well, el ser huevona o el ser floja, it's a symptom of depression. Yeah. And so if we start looking at people's behavior, el comportamiento de la gente as a, and I'm going to continue to use Spanish because a lot of the population that are listening or that I work with speak Spanish. Pero el usar el comportamiento as symptoms, son síntomas de algo más grande, then it starts really giving a lot of grace, especially to our children. Ay, la niña anda bien berrinchuda. Ay, es que es bien berrinchuda, así es. And so then you put all this pressure for this child to behave a certain way as if they should already know. Yeah. But if we start looking at it like, ¿por qué anda berrinchuda? That's a symptom of something else. Es un síntoma de algo más grande. Then it really opens the door to then be curious and connect and figure out what is going on. How can I support you? So anyways, just with the verbiage thing, that's a piece. Another thing that you mentioned that I think it's important to talk about is the things that you did to get out of the dark place. And I think as much as I love therapy and as much as I want to push for everybody to come to therapy, it's important that we know that we're resilient. Like we're able to figure things out to a certain extent, right? When you're ready to dig deeper and process where this is coming from and figure it out, then we can do that. But if you have ways to survive or have ways to deal with whatever is going on, we have that capacity to do that. And that's exactly what you did, which is something that I would have probably recommended. Yeah. Okay, what were the things that you were doing prior to this depressive episode? And another piece to that is grief. Like the loss of your cousin is a big deal because it was a sudden loss. Yeah. And that in itself is traumatic. And we're going to get into the trauma point at another episode. But I think there's a lot of pieces to what you said right now, like that connect, right? And sometimes when you say, I don't understand why I did that, it's because there's 10 factors around it rather than this just one thing. And I think when we feel anxious or we feel depressed, ¿y por qué estás triste? Si no tienes nada de qué estar triste, right? I think that's usually the feedback that we get, especially coming from like a Mexican background. And so understanding like my emotions have a reason. It doesn't have to be this one reason. It can be a couple or a bunch of reasons. It could be things that have happened 10 years ago that are barely coming into play. And it's happened where I get clients who have been resilient throughout their entire life up until they're 50. and they've been able to figure things out as they like survive traumatic events. And then at 50, they have this one traumatic event, and that's enough. La gota que derramó el vaso, right? And they're like, I don't understand why I'm not able to cope with it like I did before. Because you've been coping with it for too long. Your brain is ready to just give up on you. It's like the same way your pancreas would do if you keep eating that much sugar for a long period of time. Eventually, you can develop diabetes, right?
Yeah.
So
what do you recommend? Because I talked to a friend of mine that I was explaining what I was going through, and that she explained to me that because she was doing therapy, and she says, okay, like I feel like you're gonna overcome this like real quick, but you should still like look into it therapy to like dig deep, because it's gonna be, if you don't dig deep and find out like what's going on in there, because it's gonna be like in cycles. Like prior to the 4 or 5 years ago, when I actually battled ugly depression, and obviously the thing that happened with my cousin, and then my son, actually his uncle on his mom's side, he did it around that same period. And it was something that he did, like we tried to hide it from him. And I remember he told his mom, like, hey, like my dad doesn't want me to know that I know what's going on. But overall, like prior to that, it was such a big thing that stood out. But like looking back, like I think I did go through it, like depression, like even a couple years prior, and it was like almost every 3-4 years. But even right now, I don't know if I'm suppressing it, but I think I did. I just didn't know what to call it. Like,
yeah,
is that a thing? I'm just asking you as like
100%. It is a thing. Yeah, it's ironic. I'm not gonna say funny, not haha funny, but funny.
Yeah.
Ironically, I have some clients that come in and they're like, something's off, but I don't know what's off. So I want to be happy. I have everything. Some of them are entrepreneurs. They have the life that they want. They busted their butt to get to where they're at now. And then they're like, then why does it feel off? What's going on? I don't really have a reason to be sad. And then we start peeling the onion, right?
Yeah.
We start asking questions. And I'm like, you've been on denial for the last 10 years. And I think this is not to say that this person's bad or that there wasn't this opportunity to like process things, or that this person just doesn't want to feel. You could be the most emotionally available person, but if nobody has taught you the skills to process emotion, then you're just kind of, I make this joke with clients, you like grab trauma or emotions and we put it in this little bag, and then we put a cute little bow on it, and then we're like, I'm just gonna store it back here, and it didn't happen, and I'm just gonna continue with life as if nothing. But that's inaccurate, right? Like we actually have to face it. We have to sit in that emotion, and we have to learn how to navigate it. And I think especially in our culture, Mexican culture has such a beautiful way of just normalizing abuse and negative emotions. Like we even make jokes over pretty messed up
tóxica
stuff. Sí, la tóxica y el tóxico. And so because we have that ability to survive, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're processing things in the right way.
Yeah.
Suppressing it or being in denial of it or not wanting to face it, it's a thing. It's a cultural thing that we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I recommend therapy for everybody, because even if you come in and you're like, there's nothing wrong with me, and then I start asking about your childhood, and I start asking about how you grew up and how you felt when you were growing up and how you feel that you belonged and this and that, things are going to come up. And this is the important piece. We learn things based on what we've lived. And so let's say, I'm going to use you as an example because you provided that information, right? You said, I'm like the outcast, or I'm like the single one out when it comes to emotions, because everybody else is like emotionless, we'll say. There's this subconscious belief now that you don't fit in because you're so emotional.
Yeah.
So guess what you're going to do subconsciously? You're going to find people that make you feel like you emotionally do not belong, and you're going to feel comfortable there because that's what safety was when you were a child. And we continue to do that. Or they could be like, oh, I keep dating these a-holes and I don't understand why. Let's talk about childhood. What did you learn about emotions? What did you learn about you belonging? What did you learn about love? They all align with the environment that you grew up. So I think a lot of times people reach out to life coaches instead of therapists. I love life coaches. I have plenty of friends who are life coaches. I really appreciate them. I think they do a wonderful job. But I think they have mental health issues, but they're trying to address it in like behavioral terms. But life coaches are really good at holding you accountable and helping you get to the next step,
goal for
right?
Typically for business here.
Right. Or personal.
Oh, yeah,
right?
actually, yeah.
It just depends on what because there's life coaches for dating, there's life coaches for food,
Right.
there's and so I love that because literally they're that coaches. But then we need to go deeper. We need to process what is the mother wound. We need to process where is this coming from. And life coaches can do some of the work and they understand the generalization of it. But then when it comes to really going in and honing into the subconscious and what are the cognitive beliefs that you got from what you survived, that's where we come in. And I think a lot of people say, oh, therapy, depression. Therapy, trauma. No, si es que no estoy loco porque voy a ir a la terapia. Es que no se trata de ser loco. It's about understanding. Like, ¿qué es lo que yo creo de mí misma? ¿De dónde lo aprendí? ¿Qué significa? ¿Cómo yo mantengo este ciclo abusivo? ¿O cómo yo mantengo este ciclo de tristeza? Because your friend is actually right. You might be able to move away from it. You might be able to learn amazing skills because you're resilient and smart and loving and kind and you have a strong support system. Pero si no sabes de dónde sale la kriptonita, if you don't know where it comes from, you're bound to repeat the same thing over and over again. And so I think the subconscious does a really good job at whispering in our ear things that are not helpful. It's because you're not good enough. It's because you failed already. It's because and we own it. We're like, I'm going to try that, but I might probably going to fail, but I'm going to try it anyways. Then you're not really addressing the issue. You're just like putting it in your boat.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. And so I think therapy does a really good job at opening that. Y culpo las novelas.
Yeah.
Because I think majority of people, if you look back, this is more cultural, right? If you look back at novelas, the villains ended up in 3 ways, right? They either ended up dead, they either ended up alone and like in prison, or they ended up alone in a manicomio.
Oh, it's true.
Con la muñeca.
Yeah.
Es que fue mala
Amigas y
persona.
rivales. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I do
The
remember
burned
that.
face? I think it was
yes.
acid on her face.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so like the media
Yeah.
has showed us que los locos son esos. Son los que terminan en el manicomio con la muñeca. Mis hijos.
Yeah.
Es que se volvió loco porque es mala persona. But in reality, like therapy can really help you get to the next level. Even if you're doing well overall, it can really help you get rid of those demons like you covered earlier. And I think one of our protective factors as a culture is that we're very spiritual, right? So it really does help us do that self-awareness work. Like, ay, pues, ¿quién me hizo mal de ojo? ¿Cómo me porté mal? Sí
We're
tenemos.
blaming other people pretty much.
Yeah. And it also brings some self-awareness there, right? Like we have a lot of this spiritual awareness that I think in therapy we can really hone into. ¿De dónde aprendiste eso? ¿Por qué piensas eso? ¿Por qué viene la culpabilidad? ¿Por qué te sientes culpable? What would have been the right thing to do? And therapy really helps you process that. And the beautiful piece of it is get it out of your system. It doesn't come back. Once we process it, you go through it, whether it takes a few months or it takes some years. Once it's done and over with, we take out the trash and we throw it in the trash. We don't keep it back here in the subconscious. I don't know.
I think everything you're saying is I just keep on
connecting the dots.
I'm having childhood memories. Like obviously I want to be, I don't want to put my laundry out as well. But there's a lot of different things that like I've seen within myself and within my community, my culture. I used to work at a bank, so I would see meet all types of people. And so we could get down into it. So I have a couple questions for you that like I feel like people are going to be able to relate and connect with. So what do you think is like the main challenges Latinos the main mental health challenges they face by Latinos compared to others?
Okay. I think I'm going to throw a concept in, and this is more in the last podcast you asked me what makes me different than the rest of the therapists. And I think this is the piece. I have a bachelor's in Mexican American Studies. I actually wanted to be a lawyer. I think I said that last time. So I'm a history buff, like 100%. I love it. And there are these two concepts in Mexican American studies called Marianismo and Machismo. And I'm sure you've heard of machismo. Everybody's heard of machismo, right? Like, yo soy el hombre y se hace lo que yo diga. Y tengo 20 mujeres y Pancho Villa con dos viejas a la orilla, right? There's this concept that I think here in the States it's called toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I think masculinity is a beautiful thing. When it's toxic, it's not beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about, machismo equals men need to be soft and be this and that. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm talking about the concept that men are better than women. So I think that's the first one of the reasons why our Latino community has such a hard time dealing with emotions and mental health. But then there's a concept of Marianismo. So Marianismo is seeing the woman like Holy Virgin Mary. Yo soy una santa. Yo no hago nada mal. Pobrecita yo. And when we do that, what we do is we shift responsibility. There's no like, yo la regué como mujer, debí de haber hecho esto diferente. I should have done this different. Or apologize to our kids. How? Or the male even, because then we do that, then the male has to be tough. And then it reinforces the machismo piece. Oh. So then I can't have emotions. I can't express how I feel porque yo soy el macho. So I think, why am I going there? Because these two things, Marianismo and machismo, among other stuff like generational trauma, which we'll get to that in another episode, relates back to symptoms. And so then we see drug addictions, abuse, domestic violence, depression, anxiety. What I see the most in right now in this very moment as I'm giving therapy is family conflict. I see a lot of substance use, which usually relates back to depression.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loss, especially when we're talking about immigration. A lot of families in home country, whether it's Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Guatemala, Mexico, we're very like community-based. So there's always the tia and so it brings that self-awareness that I was talking about earlier where you're like, see, maybe I should. But then you come to the States, you're completely isolated. There's no tia that tells you, pórtate bien con tu mamá, right? And so I think the displacement plus the generational gender roles, all of it mixed together, I see a lot of substance use. I see a lot of like domestic conflict and violence. Depression, anxiety shows up usually when it's like already at its wit's end. And so cuando tengo un cliente que me dice, vengo con depresión, they're at the brink of divorce or they're at the brink of going into a mental health hospital and so then we start talking about it. You see all these toxic patterns in the family. That would be my answer. My answer would be just the gender roles that we hold and everything. I think they all add up to give you. That's what I see the most. I see depression, anxiety, and it's usually related to substance use, family conflict.
And how does culture and identity impact the mental health experience of Latinos in the therapy process?
In no way, shape, or form am I going to sell propaganda that I am a Christian therapist, because I'm not. Yeah. Like I've never read the entire Bible, so I would be talking out of my just BS if I was trying to address it. But I think spiritually, there's a huge piece to therapy. I have clients come in and say, like, creo que tengo mal de ojo. And so understanding that piece, I think, can really help that process. Understanding our familial piece is a huge process. I could, but I don't want to. But I don't want to ever give the teenager or the young adult the power or the encouragement to go against their parents. I'm just shooting themselves in the foot if I do that. In our family, we need our parents. And so how do you advocate for boundaries? How do you do these things while maintaining a healthy relationship with your parents? Yeah. That's a tricky one, right? Because culturally, that's very specific to Latinos. And understanding those pieces of our culture, understanding that going against the parents and leaving and being independent at 18 is not really a thing in our culture. Yeah. And how do you navigate that independence while also maintaining a good relationship with your parents? Understanding that medication is not really something that everybody wants to have, right? Yeah. And so, me hago un té de manzanilla, ya me calmo los nervios. Yeah. And being aware of those things, right? Okay, if the tea's gonna help, sure, let's do the tea. Until what point, right? Yeah. Do you guys pray? Yes, we pray. Okay, there's a form of prayer that is very similar to meditation, right? If I tell a client, oh, es que tiene que hacer yoga. No, la yoga es del diablo. So really being aware of those things, right? Or fui, me leyeron las cartas y me dijeron que este es mi futuro. Okay, how are we going to work around that future? How can you hone in that? And so I think those pieces of spirituality, of understanding, of susto, of family culture, those all play a role in providing that therapy process. Majority of times, those are the same reasons why they don't come to therapy. This is why we're here.
Yeah. No, honestly, I when you mentioned that, I remember there was a time where I think I was dealing with a breakup and had an old manager from the bank that she was a Christian. And I just kept on, I was so obsessed with, what is it, like Pisces? What is it called?
Yeah, like the signs. Like
yeah, all that. And I would look online, the Yahoo, like the daily, Zodiac, there you go, all that horoscope stuff. And I would tell her, and she just pretty much told me, like, hey, that's not really like normal. Like, you should look at it. And I remember she planted the seed about looking into Christianity and whatnot. And I definitely had a different way to approach the trauma I was going through at the time. But so I get where you're coming from with that, because I was doing it in a weird way.
Yeah.
I guess putting myself on blast.
It's okay. I'll put myself on blast later on.
All right, awesome. So what are the common misconceptions or stigmas about mental health within the Latino community, and what do you think we could do to like address them?
I think the piece that I was saying earlier with the novelas, right? And que la terapia es de locos. I think I'm starting to see a shift, which is good. I think social media and the new generation is normalizing therapy a lot more. Yeah. Ironically, I was talking about this with one of my friends. I was like, it's crazy how people like go to the doctor, take care of their physical health, but they don't do the same with mental health. And my friend said, oh, then that means you'd be in therapy forever. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And so I think the more that people become aware or normalize therapy as the way that you would go and get a massage, right? Yeah. Or como vas a la
like
sobadora.
A tune-up. I don't know.
Like normal, right?
Yeah.
Me lastimé el brazo, voy a ir con la sobadora.
Yeah.
Me lastimé el brazo, voy a ir con la que limpia or whatever. Then de esa misma manera, ando triste, voy a hablar con una consejera.
Yeah.
So I think the more, y me he dado cuenta que hay un shift también en social media. Like TikTok is like blowing up with, creo que la hija de Eugenio Derbez, I don't remember her name. She has her own podcast.
Yeah.
You know, has her own podcast about self-awareness and all these things. So I think the shift is already starting.
Yeah.
But I think the more people inform other people on therapy and what it means and what it looks like, the better. Currently, I'm presenting in a Catholic church, just bringing awareness to parents of what it is. So I think the more that we can talk about emotions and awareness and therapy, I think the more that our community is going to start engaging.
No, and again, like I said earlier about the whole thing with, like, when I talked to my parents about this, they just had a different perspective. Like the first time I brought it up, they weren't mean or anything like that. But this second time around, they were like super supportive. I was really surprised. I was so nervous to tell them. I remember, because I feel like a little kid again. I don't know how to describe it. I'm getting emotional again. But I remember that when I told him, like, I invited my dad for lunch. We went to go eat mariscos, and we're eating. And I thought about it. I was like, my anxiety was kicking my butt that day. And if I tell him right now, it's going to kill the mood we're about to eat. So I'm going to wait. But he was so supportive. Same thing with my mom. The next day, I took her for breakfast, and they're both so supportive. But I think the reason why they had a different view of it was because of what we went through years ago, and that they knew I went through what I went through. And going back to what you're saying right now, that we should look at it in a way, being on social media, because like everything that I do is doing real estate, how to show the best side of everything that I do, my life. And recently I decided to start putting stuff out that's a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more that's going to not necessarily shock the audience, but like something a little bit more taboo. And my friend Steven, I posted some stuff about like mental health, and it's all related to entrepreneurship. And I posted some stuff now. Obviously I'm talking about it now, and I definitely feel the reason why I took that action to go do the whole counseling stuff was because I didn't want to make my fiance, my kids, go through what I went through. When it happened years ago, my fiance was pregnant with my little one, and every time I was anywhere, I was just shut down, and I was quiet, and it even hurt me financially because I wasn't working, I wasn't bringing in money, and I felt, okay, this time around, I'm not gonna allow that to happen. And you're right, we should. It's okay. I have a really bad cold. Like I'm gonna go. I have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that was my approach. And I totally agree with you.
And I think there's a cultural piece to what you're saying, right? En nuestra cultura mexicana, latina, we take pride in the family that we are. So I'm not going to go into it deeply. We're going to do that in a different episode. So follow us. Los Hernandez, los Encinas, los Tapia, los Gonzalez, los whatever. They have this background to them, right? Yeah. And I even had conversation with people from Nogales that are like, oh, sí, mi familia es el Encinas, y sabes. Even to this day with my grandpa, right? There's a reputation that we uphold. It's a very like Latino thing. Like we're part of this family. This family has a reputation. You can see it in Encanto, please. Feel free, right?
Oh, wow.
You hold that. And so lo que pasa en la casa se queda en la casa. What happens at home, we keep it at home. We don't need to be telling everybody. So the vulnerability piece is not really available because then it takes away from the pride. It takes away from the orgullo. It takes away from the, ¿qué va a pensar la gente? La familia. And so there's already this layer of expectation that you're supposed to perform. And the oldest, first generation, we're the ones that get porque I am the oldest first generation. Now I'm getting vulnerable. Hay como una expectativa that you're going to be the one that breaks the ceiling for the family, especially if you're the first generation here in the States.
Yeah.
Right?
I can only imagine with you graduating all the degrees and all that, like I'm assuming it's a little bit more of a pressure, even 100%. Way more?
Yes. And so I think there's an extra layer of breaking that. Just breaking I don't care what people are going to say. And understanding that, it's such a big deal. Porque a veces hard trauma happens más por el que dirán versus what you actually feel for your children. Like, ay, no, ¿cómo se van a enterar que estás pasando por un divorcio? ¿Qué te pasa? Eso no se hace, right? You're supposed to be married forever. How dare you? And so I think even understanding those cultural pieces with therapy, ¿cómo vamos a ir a la terapia? Qué vergüenza. Que sepan que vamos con el loquero o con la loquera, right? And so even breaking those things, I think those conversations are important, right? Cuando están todas las tías sentadas, las comadres platicando de fulanito y el chisme del otro día, también decir, oye, ¿sabes qué? A mí se me hace que quiero ir con la psicóloga. Ay, amiga, no te está pasando nada. No, es que, ¿sabes qué? Fíjate que fue fulanita, and I usually use this example. Months go by, they're like, ¿te ves? Bien feliz, bien contenta. La psicóloga. So then people are starting to, oh my God, there's an extra layer, right? Yeah. And so I think entre más hay esas conversaciones, the more that we have those difficult conversations, the easier it'll be for us to normalize that. Yeah. And like you said, you have a cold, you have a flu, go to the doctor.
Yeah. No, I really feel like we should definitely leverage like the tools that we have now to really, I don't know, judge me right now, please. But as corny as it sounds, like I really feel like I can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Like and
that's not corny.
And I really do, just because, you know, what happened with my little cousin, it just like you never know who's really hurting. And if people are aware of what are the symptoms of you called it pretty much an illness, you said, we could take action.
Absolutely.
And so now, like the older I get, I try to talk to my son differently, not scream at him or anything like that, and trying to talk to him. And just because I don't want to do that. I don't want to like be that parent. I just want to do things differently. And I think it starts with us. I really believe that.
We're giving, sabes, algo que, just to summarize something that you said that I think it's important. When we give our kids the ability to function at a cognitive level, I'll explain that in a little bit, you just opened a vast amount of like opportunities for them to grow. Cuando nosotros creamos a hijos basados en trauma o en emotional, so our brain works trauma brain, emotional brain, cognitive brain. Cognitive brain is like clear-minded. Things are good. I can think. When we as parents can create such a safe space for our children to not have to function out of trauma brain, to not have to function out of emotional brain. Oh, my dad makes me feel so abandoned. I'm so upset. That doesn't exist. We take it off.
Yeah.
And we provided this safety and this emotional availability. We just open the door for our children to think cognitively, to think things through. ¿Cómo le puedes ayudar ahora a tu mamá? Anda cansada, mira, pobrecita. They're emotionally available. They're able to think of other people. They're starting to think, how can I, this 8-year-old, this 10-year-old, this 6-year-old, put some of me into this household? I have power. I have strength. That's awesome. And then they start creating that. Guess what you're teaching them? You're teaching them how to be an entrepreneur at 12. Right? You're teaching them how to be like, what power do I have in the world?
Yeah.
As a teenager. I didn't think of that when I was a teenager. I can't imagine my kid when she's 12 or 13 and says, I have power in this world. I can make a difference. You just open the door for college, university, doctorate, whatever. I don't know. Maybe you don't even need a degree, right? It could be something different. They invent the next
new
artificial intelligence.
Yeah, AI.
Exactly. But it's the ability to give them that opportunity. I think it's something that we haven't really learned within our culture that needs to be addressed. And I think therapy can open that door.
So I have one more question for you before we wrap this up. So are there any cultural factors or practices that can benefit Latino mental health well-being, and how can individuals make the use of like resources?
I think one of the strengths in our community is community, right? And a lot of times the church or the community events or whatever will have resources to connect with therapists or anything. The beauty of nowadays is that every answer la tienes en el teléfono, right?
Yeah.
You can go look at TikTok and say, ¿Cómo ser un padre más emocional? Y te van a salir videos así, right? And so we have the answers at our fingertips. I think looking for resources within your community can really help you get to the next level, right? Whether it's talking to the priest or talking to your coach or talking to whoever and say, hey, do you know of a place where I can find a therapist? And they can open that. Or, ¿sabes qué? Me está pasando esto con la comadre, right? They can say, ay, ¿sabes qué? Yo conozco a alguien que... So I think the more that you're connected with the community, the more that you can advocate for what you need, the more that you can have those vulnerable conversations, the more doors you open to be able to find those resources.
I love that. Like, I really feel, I'm just thinking about what I'm trying to accomplish right now. Like, thank you for allowing me to be part of what you're creating. And I'm going to probably invite you to, I'm starting a podcast myself as well. And I'm going to be interviewing entrepreneurs. It's going to be more business oriented, but we're going to talk about mental health. It's just something that, especially, I truly believe entrepreneurs go through even a higher level of stress, like even and responsibilities. Not only are you worrying about like your lights being on, your office space, and all these responsibilities, like whatever other issues you got, like the people are relying on you, you got employees, there's added stress. That's something that I want to do with that podcast. And what you're accomplishing is just having these conversations so people could say, hey, you know what, like I try to do that. I try to talk to close friends and family, open up about it. And I'll be surprised, like some of the people like that, like I would never would think that they would open up about that. And I'm talking about dudes with tattoos and like that grew up hood and all that stuff. And just because I open up about stuff like that, they just, but again, it took me being vulnerable, like being like that, to open up that door. Like and I think other people could do the same.
Yeah. I think that goes back to the stigma, that question that you asked me earlier. I think even you said, I'm the one that's emotional in my family.
Yeah.
We should all be emotional. Every single one of us. It's part of our genetic makeup.
Yeah.
We just deprivate ourselves from that beautiful thing that's called emotions because that's the stigma.
So to really wrap this up, what advice or words of encouragement would you give to Latinos who maybe are hesitant to seek for the mental help, that support? What do you got to say for that?
Follow me on Instagram. Just kidding. No, I've definitely had clients come in with siblings or mom or cousin or Theo or whoever. Sometimes just the idea of coming to therapy is scary. And so I've sat next to a friend calling the therapist next to me just
Yeah.
to help walk through the process, right? And so if you need to bring someone with you, do it. Talk about it. Ask around. You can Google the person
Yeah.
and figure out, is this a good fit? Or I know that there's a lot of ads on Instagram or TikTok for big platforms that offer therapy. Look for other stuff. Look locally. That would be my advice. Talk to somebody that can be your support person if this is what you want to do. And then Google something that's local to see if there's somebody that you can connect with. I take pride in being a small business and welcoming people to my office and having them in person and Spanglish and then not remembering a word y diciéndolo en español para so there could be resources that are very specific for you locally. So
Yeah.
my advice would be search it up, and number two, get a person that can be your support person throughout the process.
No, definitely agree. So if people want to follow you on social media to get educated and definitely look at these podcast episodes, what's going to be your call to action? Like, how could people find you, reach you?
I have two Instagrams, the professional personal mine. It's dulce.encinas.lmsw. That's what my license stands for. And then the other one is Kindness Therapy AZ altogether. And yeah, I do have a ton of content, and I will be posting it little by little, where I'm having just like information about depression, information about anxiety, information about toxic positivity. It's just different themes. They're like really small 3-minute snippets, but it can really help you at least open up your mind to certain things. So those are two resources. You can DM me directly. And if you Google Maps Kindness Therapy, my information will be there as well. Direct number and email address.
And then lastly, the other thing too that you brought up was like, if you guys have any questions, you guys could DM us.
Yes, please.
So we invite you and encourage you guys to do that.
Yeah, leave some questions in the comments. If anything comes up today that makes you feel I want to talk about that, feel free. Send me a whole paragraph. I'm okay with that, because then I can really craft answers for those specific paragraphs and then answer some of the questions, because they say some things and then you're like, elaborate more. So please feel free. Our comment session on YouTube, and then sending us some DMs. We can go from there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.